who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 27th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are a surge in gold's price that carried it past the $5,000 an ounce barrier to settle above it on Monday has boosted mining companies' profits, encouraged them to restart old mines, expand existing operations, and develop new projects. U.S. stocks powered through geopolitical concerns to lift the S&P 500, Dow, and NASDAQ by 0.5%, 0.6%, and 0.4%, respectively. Quantum computing company IonQ struck a deal to buy chip maker SkyWater Technology for $35 a share, or roughly $1.8 billion. NVIDIA said it is simplifying the tracking of changes in the weather and climate with a new suite of open-source artificial intelligence models. NVIDIA invested $2 billion in CoreWeave, and the companies announced a collaboration to build new AI factories. The EU undertook an investigation into Elon Musk's X following a public outcry over sexualized deep-fake images created by the company's Grok AI service. The chairman of the Senate's Antitrust Subcommittee voiced concerns about Netflix's proposed acquisition of the Warner Brothers movie and TV studios and HBO Max streaming service. Bankrupt auto parts supplier First Brands is shutting down parts of its North American business after top lenders resisted providing additional funding to keep it afloat. The Treasury Department canceled all of its contracts with consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton amid the administration's cuts to government contract funding. Now for the highlights under the worldwide section. Trump signaled that he is willing to wind down a massive immigration enforcement effort in Minnesota amid backlash over aggressive tactics that have left 2 U.S. citizens in the state dead. Monthly health insurance bills are rising for millions of Americans, putting new pressure on a nation frustrated by the high cost of living. The Trump administration is proposing roughly flat rates for Medicare insurers next year, an update that falls well short of Wall Street expectations. U.S. trading partners, feeling burned by an unpredictable White House, are reassessing China in a drive to lessen their long-standing reliance on Washington. The U.S. will raise tariffs on South Korea to 25% from 15%, Trump said, insisting that Seoul hadn't moved fast enough to implement a trade pact the two nations arrived at last year. Rights groups said they are uncovering evidence that the death toll from Iran's suppression of anti-government protest is far higher than first thought, with some projecting it will exceed 10,000. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group entered the Middle East, giving Trump additional offensive and defensive capabilities should he choose to attack Iran. A global crackdown on human traffickers and smugglers, coordinated by Interpol, led to the arrest of more than 3,700 suspects and aided more than 4,400 potential victims, the organization said. A Los Angeles jury is poised to consider whether content on social media platforms is causing mental health disorders in adolescents. Israel recovered the body of the last hostage taken into Gaza on October 7th, 2023, the military said, paving the way for Israel to reopen the Palestinian enclave's only international border crossing and removing an obstacle to advancing a peace deal. The picture on today's front page takes place in a city dwelling on a street where there is parking on both sides and cars are completely covered in snow, and one lone man is out trying to shovel his car out of the snow. And that caption reads, "Snow Slam." People shoveled Monday in Boston, where over 17 inches of snow fell in the weekend storm that had nearly 200 million Americans under weather warnings. More than 710,000 households from Texas to Maine were still without power. And the article, U.S. Digs Out from Monster Winter Storm. The article, Deadly Winter Storm Disrupts Flights, Leaves Hundreds of Thousands in Dark, by Garrett Vipers, Joe Diavilla, and Elisa Lutpat. A sprawling winter storm that battered southern, central, and eastern parts of the U.S. with heavy snow and frigid temperatures over the weekend has left multiple people dead and continued to snarl air travel and power grids. The storm continued to disrupt thousands of flights Monday, and about 560,000 customers from West Texas to Maine were without power for a third day. Forecasters told people to continue to expect similar sub-zero conditions Monday, with around 200 million Americans under weather alerts from the National Weather Service, covering ice storms, extreme temperatures, and cold weather advisories. New England could expect snow Monday night as the storm tapers off, and much of the country could face lingering cold on Tuesday, according to the Weather Service. Other articles from the front page follow. Health insurance costs surge, can rival mortgage expenses. Middle-income earners who rely on Obamacare see monthly bills soar, by Rachel Louise Ensign. Millions of people across the U.S. are starting to see their monthly health insurance bills rise, a new pressure point for a nation still frustrated with the high cost of living. Many of those facing the most dramatic dollar increases are middle-income earners who buy health insurance through the marketplaces set up by the government's Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. Expanded subsidies for those insured under the ACA expired on December 31st, the central battle in last year's record-long government shutdown. That shutdown ended with no resolution on the subsidies, and lawmakers haven't passed legislation to revive them. Now the newly calculated insurance bills are coming due, and people are having to figure out how to pay up or go without. Lenny and Mandy Wilson, who are 47 years old and live in Charleston, West Virginia, paid $255 a month last year for a low-end ACA plan. Late last year, they learned their bill would be going up to $2,155 a month, a sum nearly triple their monthly mortgage payment of about $760. The Wilsons each squeezed in one last checkup before the end of 2025 and are now going without insurance. They are planning to put the money they used to spend on their premiums into an emergency fund. They will avoid any preventative care and hope their modest savings can cover any medical cost. Their ACA insurance wasn't the greatest plan, but it gave us some coverage and made sure we wouldn't go bankrupt if something happened, said Lenny Wilson, who co-owns an IT business. His wife, Mandy Wilson, makes pottery. Living without insurance feels precarious. If we step off the ladder wrong and make a trip to the ER or have to spend the night in the hospital for any reason, that would pretty much wipe us out financially, Lenny said. The couple face such a big increase because they earn about $110,000 a year combined, or more than 400% of the federal poverty level. That group is hardest hit by the expiring subsidies. During the pandemic, Congress expanded subsidies for ACA plans to many households earning over 400% of the poverty level. $62,600 for a single person, or $128,600 for a family of four in the contiguous 48 states in 2025. Middle-income earners without good options for workplace health insurance, such as early retirees, independent contractors, and small business owners, were quick to sign up. Nonprofit KFF estimated that about 10% of ACA enrollees in 2025, or about 2.5 million people, have annual incomes above 400%. Now, with their subsidies disappearing, they generally make far too much money to qualify for Medicaid and are too young to enroll in Medicare. The typical enrollee with subsidized ACA coverage is projected to face a 114% rise in premium bills if they stay on the same plan, KFF projects, from an average of $888 a year in 2025 to $1,904 in 2026. The dollar increases are often far higher for the middle income and upper middle income families with this type of coverage. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. President weighs retreat in Minnesota. Trump signals wind down of enforcement after fatal shooting. Bovino to leave state. By Mariah Timms, Michelle Hackman, and Annie Linsky. President Trump signaled on Monday that he is willing to wind down a massive immigration enforcement effort in Minnesota amid backlash over aggressive tactics that have left 2 U.S. citizens in the state dead. The president said on social media that he had a very good call with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat, who has called on the administration to halt immigration operations in the state, and that the two seem to be on a similar wavelength. In addition, Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino will imminently leave Minnesota along with some of his agents, according to administration officials familiar with the matter. Bovino had emerged as the public face of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement activity in the state, accompanying agents on operations. It was a Border Patrol agent that fatally shot 37-year-old Alex Preddy over the weekend. Border Czar Tom Homan will be the lead point of contact for the Trump administration in Minnesota, the White House said. Homan would be coordinating on the ground, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said, and Bovino would very much continue to lead Customs and Border Patrol throughout and across the country. Trump also said on social media later Monday that he had had a good phone conversation with Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and that Homan and Frey would be meeting on Tuesday. The American city at war with the U.S. government. A showdown between federal and local authorities in Minneapolis makes even some Trump supporters uneasy. By Joshua Chafin and Michelle Hackman, Minneapolis. For months, Jacob Frey, the Minneapolis mayor, felt a growing dread watching the number of federal immigration and border patrol agents swell from dozens to hundreds to thousands, all deployed to his city to carry out President Trump's promise of the largest deportation of illegal immigrants in American history. We've seen constant escalation, Frey said. The police chief and I were both publicly and privately expressing deep concern of the possibility, even likelihood, that somebody was going to get seriously injured or killed. Then Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother, was fatally shot in the head on January 7th by an immigration and customs enforcement agent during one of the many protests erupting in the city against the actions of federal agents. On Saturday, it happened again. Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old nurse at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center, was shot with 10 rounds and killed by a Border Patrol agent after a group of officers wrestled him to the frozen ground in front of a donut shop where he died. Those fatalities, in a span of little more than 2 weeks, marked a new and alarming phase in a 2-month confrontation between the residents of an American city, carrying phones and whistles, and armed officers of the U.S. government. It has yielded jarring images that, to many outside of Minneapolis, seem from a foreign land. Unmarked vehicles of masked men prowling city streets, and the martial scowl of Gregory Bovino, the uniformed lead of Operation Metro Surge, tossing a chemical grenade at protesters. Broadly, the conflict reflects the nation's split views of immigration policy, an issue that helped carry Trump to the White House a year ago. To many Minnesota residents, it has become a fight against an occupying army bent on subduing their progressive city. The White House said Monday that Trump would consider pulling out some federal agents in exchange for more local cooperation. Gold miners ramp up as prices hit milestone. By Alexandra Wexler, Johannesburg. For years, hundreds of illegal miners, known locally as Zamas, prospected for gold on a patch of land on the outskirts of the city with hammers and chisels in hand-dug tunnels. Now the site has been transformed into South Africa's first new underground gold mine in more than 15 years, part of a global rush to boost production of a metal trading at record prices. It looked like a Mad Max movie, said Rudy Diesel, chief executive of West Wits Mining, the Australian company that owns the mine. I had to crawl on my stomach to get in there. Around $100 million of investment is pouring into the mine, where workers now sport hard hats, carry emergency breathing devices, and use advanced drills and other equipment. The project, called Kuala Shallows, recovered its first gold in October and is estimated to produce more than $4.5 billion of the metal at current market prices. Gold settled above $5,000 for the first time on Monday, driven by heightened geopolitical concerns, among other factors. The precious metal has more than doubled in value in less than 2 years. Silver, meanwhile, leapt 14% to $115.50 Monday. The surge has boosted profits for mining companies around the globe, encouraging them to restart old mines, expand existing operations, and develop new projects. Now for other articles within the paper. Israel to reopen Gaza crossing as last hostage's body found, by Anat Peled, Feliz Solomon, and Summer Saeed. Israel recovered the body of the last hostage taken into Gaza on October 7, 2023, the military said on Monday, paving the way for Israel to reopen the Palestinian enclave's only international border crossing and removing an obstacle that had kept a fragile peace deal from advancing. The remains of Ran Gwilly, a 24-year-old Israeli military police sergeant who was killed and whose body was taken to Gaza during the Hamas-led attack, were located in a graveyard and identified by forensic experts in Israel. This followed an announcement by Israel late Sunday that it would reopen the Rafah border crossing, the only way for Palestinians to enter and leave the enclave, after Gwilly's body was returned to Israel for burial. Israel described the opening of the border crossing as limited and said it would take place under Israeli oversight, with Palestinians undergoing security screenings to leave and enter. Israeli and Arab mediators were still negotiating details about how the crossing would operate and how many people would be allowed to enter and exit daily, said people familiar with the matter. Flat Rates Offered to Medicare Insurers by Anna Wild Matthews and Christopher Weaver. The Trump administration is proposing roughly flat rates for Medicare insurers next year, an update that falls well short of Wall Street expectations. Payments to the plans would increase by an estimated 0.09% on average in 2027. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services proposed on Monday. Shares of United Health Group, the biggest Medicare insurer by membership, fell more than 9% in after-hours trading after the Wall Street Journal first reported the plans. Rival Medicare insurer Humana's shares were down 12%, and CVS Health fell more than 9%. The Medicare agency is also proposing to eliminate a lucrative industry billing practice that has raised concerns with government watchdogs and was examined in reporting by the Journal on Medicare Insurers. Christopher Klump, CMS Deputy Administrator and Director of Medicare, said the proposal aimed to improve payment accuracy and ensure Medicare insurers have stable reimbursement. The agency wants to focus on bolstering the billing system's simplicity, competition, and accuracy, he said. The private Medicare plans, known as Medicare Advantage, are a core business for the insurers, and federal payment policies have a huge impact on their finances. The 0.09% increase is worth about $700 million total to the industry. Analysts had predicted that the Medicare agency would propose a 2027 rate increase roughly in the range of 4% to 6%. This year, health insurers got a 5.06% increase. A spokesman for AHIP, an insurance industry group, said the proposal could result in benefit cuts and higher costs for 35 million seniors and people with disabilities. A main reason the proposed rates fall short of Wall Street analyst estimates is tied to federal staff actuaries' calculation of spending growth, which is tied to cost in the traditional Medicare program. As more data come in, the actuaries often adjust this estimated growth rate before the Medicare Advantage payment policies are completed in April. More U.S. allies flirt with China by Kim Mackrell and Max Colchester. U.S. trading partners, feeling burned by an unpredictable and transactional White House, are reassessing China in a drive to lessen their long-standing reliance on the U.S. From Canada to Europe and South Korea, the U.S. post-war allies are scouring the globe for alternative markets. Some are weighing closer ties to China, the world's second-largest economy after the U.S., even as they worry about Beijing's economic and military might and the risk of U.S. retaliation. President Trump on Saturday threatened 100% tariffs on Canadian goods if the country makes a deal with China, highlighting how the world's middle powers increasingly are under pressure to choose between what many of them view as bad options. The threat came from Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney as he announced a sharp cut in Canada's levies on Chinese-made electric vehicles and touted a new strategic partnership with China. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later suggested that Trump's threat related to a broad free trade deal with China, something Carney says Canada isn't pursuing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will travel to Beijing this week to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, the first visit by a UK Prime Minister in 8 years. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung said recently that he wants a full-scale restoration of ties with China. Others are more skeptical. The European Union said recently that it is open to price floors as a replacement for tariffs on Chinese EVs, although policymakers in the bloc remain hesitant about any wider rapprochement, reconciliation, and haven't backed down in other areas. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo is set to meet with Xi in Beijing on Tuesday, and German leader Friedrich Merz is expected to travel to China in February. Few expect a return to the more optimistic period of Sino-Western relations before Xi came to power in 2012. Instead, many capitals have launched delicate hedging exercises to stop relations with Beijing from deteriorating further. The hope is China opens its domestic markets, imports more foreign goods, and continues to invest across Western nations. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Mass deportation by the numbers. ICE arrests are growing, but fewer have a criminal history. President Trump and Governor Tim Walz may be stepping back from the political brink after a phone call Monday that both called constructive. The best result would be for Minnesota and the Twin Cities to cooperate with immigration enforcement and the feds to reduce their footprint. Meanwhile, let's look at how the Trump administration's deportation policy is being implemented by the numbers. Mr. Trump campaigned on a promise to deport criminal migrants, the worst of the worst, as the Department of Homeland Security put it. That policy has public support, but the migrant roundup has become far broader. Last week, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem posted on social media, "We have arrested over 10,000 criminal illegal aliens who were killing Americans, hurting children, and raining terror in Minneapolis." Overall, Ms. Noem says Immigration and Customs Enforcement has removed murderers, pedophiles, rapists, gang members, and terrorists. She told CBS that 70% of them have committed or have charges against them on violent crimes. It started out that way. At the beginning of 2025, 87% of ICE arrests were immigrants with either a prior conviction or a criminal charge pending, according to ICE data obtained by the Deportation Data Project. Only 13% of those arrested at the beginning of 2025 didn't have either a conviction or a pending charge. But the criminal share of apprehensions has declined as the months have gone on. By October 2025, the percentage of arrested immigrants with a prior conviction or criminal charge had fallen to 55%. Since October, 73% taken into ICE custody had no criminal conviction, and only 5% had a violent criminal conviction, according to a Cato Institute review of ICE data. Many of the criminal immigrants the administration counts among those in detention are convicted criminals culled from prisons. White House border czar Tom Homan objected to Minneapolis's sanctuary city policy because he said it wasn't letting the administration take prisoners into federal custody. "If they'd let us in their damn jail," he said, "we could arrest the bad guy in the safety and security of the jail." Minnesota Governor Tim Walz disputes that in his nearby op-ed, but there's no doubt Minneapolis and St. Paul have ordinances that bar using resources to help ICE apprehend people based on immigration status. That complicates ICE's job and makes confrontations more likely. Syracuse professor Austin Kusher, who tracks official ICE data, finds that between September 21st, 2025 and January 7th, 2026, single-day ICE detentions increased 11,296, but only 902 of those were convicted criminals. 2,273 had pending criminal charges, and 8,121 were other immigrant violators. ICE arrests have been trending upward since January 2025, but criminal arrests have plateaued. All of which means that the Trump administration's rhetoric about deporting criminals doesn't match its current, much broader policy of mass deportation. As ICE agents target businesses, schools, and homes, scenes of unrest involving mothers, children, and longtime U.S. residents become more common. This explains why immigration enforcement is becoming a political liability for Republicans. Ending migrant chaos at the border was necessary after the Biden administration, but White House aide Stephen Miller's undisciplined mass deportation and zero immigration policy is building distrust, and the White House pitch that public safety justifies its enforcement is losing credibility. From the opinion pages, sanctuary cities can be deadly. To reduce tension and violence, let local police departments cooperate with ICE. By William McGurn. Here is a way to prevent altercations and violence involving federal officers on the streets of Minneapolis. Order local police to cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement and other agents enforcing the nation's immigration laws. The corollary ought to be obvious, but clearly isn't. Tell citizens exercising their right to protest not to get in the way of those enforcing the law. This weekend, America saw how deadly the consequences of non-cooperation can be. In the tragic ICE shooting of Alex Preddy, much of what happened is still in dispute, but we know largely from videos that have been broadcast around the world that the handgun Mr. Preddy legally owned and carried was taken from him before he was killed. The sides harden into their positions using words they will probably come to regret. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem accused Mr. Preddy of brandishing his gun, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who last year called ICE Trump's modern-day Gestapo, refers to ICE's presence as an occupation. ICE, meanwhile, appears to operate safely enough in red states. Mr. Preddy was the second Minneapolis resident fatally shot by ICE this month. Renee Good was killed when she refused a police order to get out of her car. Surely it's possible to enforce the law and reduce the chances of a fatal encounter such as those that ended the lives of Miss Good and Mr. Preddy. The simplest way to make such encounters safer is for local authorities to cooperate with federal law enforcement. If ICE could count on this cooperation, When its agents sought to arrest someone in Minnesota, the enforcement would be handled quietly and probably without incident. One reason so many ICE agents are in Minnesota now is that every operation there needs not only agents to arrest the wanted person, but others to protect them. Ideally, that role is handled by local police who know their cities, their culture, and their people better than outsiders. But with so many blue cities, including Minneapolis and St. Paul, having adopted sanctuary policies, the rules of the game are changed. Blue state polls moralize about immigration while shirking responsibility for the signals they are sending. The main signal is for angry people to adjudicate immigration policy on the streets instead of in court or Congress. The outrage that follows is also highly selective. Take the trespassers who disrupted a service at the city's church in St. Paul on January 18th, as live streamed by former CNN host Don Lemon. They were full of moral indignation because one of the church pastors supposedly works for ICE. Not one of the trespassers seemed to appreciate that the right to free exercise of religion is the first right mentioned in the First Amendment, even before freedom of speech and of the press, or that attacking churches has an unsavory history, usually associated with Southern men in white hoods. Governor Walz hasn't condemned the city's church protesters, though the governor's office issued a feeble statement that he in no way supports interrupting a place of worship. In a letter to Mr. Walz Saturday, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi urged him to repeal Minnesota's sanctuary policies and reach an agreement with ICE that avoids pushing these interactions into your streets. Mr. Walz writes nearby that the State Department of Corrections honors all federal and local detainers. But last February, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison's office issued an opinion that Minnesota law prohibits state and local law enforcement agencies from holding someone based on an immigration detainer if the person would otherwise be released from custody. Mr. Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey stoke the flames, perhaps because the unrest helps divert attention from the $9 billion in taxpayer dollars lost to welfare fraud on their watch, which has dominated the news until these two ICE shootings. On Fox News this weekend, Minnesota's last Republican governor, Tim Pawlenty, highlighted the corrosive effect of the Walz-Frey resistance on federal law enforcement. He rightly emphasized that the videos of Mr. Preddy being shot provoke questions that demand answers. But he questioned the mentality that Minneapolis is exempt from federal laws because of the self-righteousness of people who don't like them. This fact that the locals will not cooperate with the federal government, he said, and in fact affirmatively resist them, is one of the main reasons we have so much dysfunction in the situation in Minnesota. The details of shootings are messy, no surprise in such a highly charged and confused environment. What we do know is that when the time came for local leaders to use their knowledge and resources to reduce the lawlessness, they preferred that the streets direct events rather than the courts, law enforcement, or the political process. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Time for a ceasefire on immigration enforcement. Demagogues on both sides are undermining public trust and heightening the risk of further violence. By Gerard Baker. Inevitably, limited as we are by an entirely binary political discourse, the people who dominate our national stage have given us their verdicts on the deaths of 2 people at the hands of immigration enforcement agents. They were, in one account, a terrifying example of the police state tyranny to which President Trump and his Republican Party have subjected America. First, a young mother, then an intensive care nurse gunned down on the streets of one of our cities merely for exercising their precious right to protest. The killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis on Saturday appears to be an execution by immigration enforcement, declared Representative Ilhan Omar. Alternatively, the 2 killings were justifiable response of federal officers to existential threats from domestic terrorists as they went about their vital job of enforcing the law. Quote, "An assassin tried to murder federal agents," said Stephen Miller, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, after Saturday's incident, echoing the language he and others in the administration used after the killing of Renee Nicole Good in her car earlier this month. The rush to judgment on the basis of online video is tempting but perilous, and I am reluctant to join it. But from what we have seen, the killing of Mr. Preddy is especially troubling. I suspect most Americans are deeply uneasy about it, but I suspect also that most don't think that what has been going on in Minneapolis is evidence of either police state repression or domestic terrorism. Instead, it seems the killings are an inevitable tragic consequence of the tension that has arisen between federal law enforcement's aggressive tactics and the resistance from citizens and local governments. It is time for urgent de-escalation on both sides. The Trump administration's efforts to remove people in the country illegally are legitimate and necessary and enjoy full democratic legitimacy. The failure to control illegal immigration and the Biden administration's decision to open our borders to millions of such migrants was an act of wanton self-harm that will take years to repair. Mr. Trump was elected in 2024 in large part to begin that repair, not only by closing the border, but by removing most of those illegal immigrants already here. Protesting law enforcement activity is legitimate, but that intervention itself carries risks and in many cases leads to crime. We have in this country unscrupulous politicians in places like Minneapolis who seem determined to impede the activities of ICE and to encourage potentially illegal interventions in their activities. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz seems eager to renew his relevance in national Democratic politics in the wake of his defeat in the 2024 vice presidential contest. But as we now stand, after these two avoidable killings, we must acknowledge that the administration's approach to achieving its reasonable objectives is failing the test of proportion, fairness, and legitimacy in the eyes of the public. The far left and its mainstream Democratic enablers want us to abandon all efforts at immigration enforcement. But their efforts to undermine the process are nothing compared with the public unease that is being generated by the methods ICE is using. The images of platoons of armed, masked men, seemingly equipped for street warfare, descending on parking lots and shopping malls, the spectacle of grandmothers and children being seized by agents, the reports of U.S. citizens being detained, all repel most decent Americans. Now that these activities and the protests they have engendered have resulted in multiple deaths, the administration and its allies are further undermining trust by their public response to the incidents. Calling the 2 protesters killed in Minneapolis domestic terrorists is an insult to the intelligence. Whether or not they were responsible for their own deaths, as in law they might have been, the implication that their killing should be treated as some sort of condign, suitable execution is simply loathsome. Lying about what we all can actually see on our screens adds injury to the insult. While no one can say with confidence exactly what unfolded in Minneapolis on the basis of cell phone video, we can be confident that the description offered by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was mostly fiction. If the words of our top government officials can be so easily disproved by the evidence of our own eyes, faith in the policy is destroyed. Worst of all, by instantly defending and even praising every act by an immigration officer, however dubious, the administration is actively enabling escalation. Such instant exoneration increases the likelihood that worse will happen next time. The message from the administration that every one of these officers hears after these episodes: whatever you do, whatever the circumstances, we will support you and denounce anyone you harm as an enemy of the state. Officers may not have absolute immunity in law, but the government is encouraging them to act with absolute impunity. The demagoguery is self-defeating and dangerous. We are sliding toward a low-grade civil war, propelled there by the grotesque cynicism of Miss Noem and her cohorts and the reckless defiance of Mr. Walls and his. Humor disarms an angry brother, by Mike Kerrigan. I have 2 sons still living at home. In brotherly exchange, Jack, 14, is quite funny, but his mouth occasionally writes checks that his body can't cash. For Finn, 16, has height and weight on him. Thankfully, Finn is a gentle giant, until he isn't. On Saturday afternoon, Jack ruffled Finn's feathers. So annoyed was Finn, who had friends over, that he hinted, that when his last friend went home, more than words would be exchanged between 2 brothers with a non-aggression pact theretofore between them. The kitchen floor, suddenly terra incognita, Jack looked to me across the table for help. Such frontier justice as Finn had meted out to date had fallen short of the physical kind. What should I do? Jack asked me, knowing beyond doubt that he'd crossed the Rubicon. Write a personal note saying you're sorry, I suggested. And if you really want to be clever, put a $5 bill inside. It's impossible to stay mad when a little cheddar falls out of a card someone sent you. Jack ran upstairs, presumably to follow my advice. He didn't. Jack dispensed with the card entirely and scrounged up only $2 from his room, which he handed to Finn with an unceremonious "here," went back to his seat at the table and began to write. "What are you writing?" I asked, with Finn within earshot. I assumed it was the card. Maybe it was, but I'll never know based on what Jack answered. "Well, someone has to do the first draft of my obituary," Jack deadpanned. I laughed, Jack laughed, and most important, Finn laughed. The storm clouds dissipated as fast as they'd gathered, and Jack knew the bad blood between brothers was all but forgotten. A father and his young sons all learned a valuable lesson that day. Humor can de-escalate tension, but it works best when the effort is authentic. Mr. Kerrigan is an attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a doctor standing as his male patient is seated, and the doctor says, "Here is a prescription for a new drug." I don't know much about it, but I like their commercials. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 27th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and stay warm and safe.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555.